let me just ask you, the talk is of the Federal Reserve, quote, regaining credibility by hiking interest rates next week. Now, does that language sound unhelpful in the context of a pandemic recovery?
We have to be very humble in terms of how we determine actions at the time of high uncertainty. The Fed is acting responsibly because inflation in the United States is turning into an economic and social concern. We also know that actions by the Fed are very significant for the US. So this delicate balancing act between fighting inflation but protecting the recovery is something that I'm confident the Fed is very mindful of. The issue here is that what the Fed does has implications for the US. It has implications for other countries, especially for those that have high level of dollar-denominated debt. And there, that could throw cold water on what for some countries is already a weak recovery. And this is why what the Fed is doing to clearly communicate, to prevent surprises, is hugely important. And our message to countries with high level of dollar-denominated debt is act now. If you can extend maturities, please do it. If you have currency mismatches, now is the moment to address them. And I can tell you where my worry is highest. It is for low-income countries, where 60% of them are now either in debt distress or in the danger of debt distress. This is twice as much as in 2015. So we have to be careful how we also support those that without international support are going to be in deep, deep trouble.
Welcome back, everybody, to WWTA News. Here we talk finance, here we talk economy, and here we talk crypto. All right, so that was a brief video we saw, and we're going to discuss that a little bit, share my thoughts and ideas on that. And first thing I'd like to say is that was a very telling statement from the question that she answered. So a lot of things happened there. One, the Fed is increasing the interest rate. We already knew that. The Fed increasing the interest rate is going to play a big part globally. That it will. The dollar is the world reserve currency. It's also, when we talk about bonds, secure bonds, most nations hold to those secure bonds because they want those bonds to mature and to get payment in dollar for those contracts that they're holding, those debt bonds that they're holding. So they want those bonds to come to maturity so they can get the money from it. And I think, if I understand that correctly, so other nations that are holding debt bonds are looking to get paid. And when those bonds mature, so let's just actually look at that. Let's just look at that and see if we get a maturity date, right? So she talks about an extension of maturity date, and it says if the bank provides an offer of extension, it may be accepted by the borrowers until the second business day before the maturity date, in which case the maturity date should be extended for 364 days from the day such offer is accepted. So with the maturity date, that's the time when something has to be done, and so you can extend it if you're a borrower, because you can't completely pay it off, so you can extend it there if you're paying some of these debts. But for those who are holding secured bonds, right, the United States secured national bonds, then they're there waiting for the maturity because they want to be paid. And so if the interest goes up, they're still holding their bonds. They want to get paid. And for those nations and countries that have taken out loans with the dollar, they have to pay it back. And so if they can't afford to pay it back because the Fed is about to put the pressure on, then they're going to have to start asking for extensions to make these payments. Now, the other thing is, if they can't make these payments, then the United States can't make their payments on the debts that they've got to make. Now, of course, they can always print more money. That's what the Fed has the ability to do. They can print their own money. But that's not necessarily a good thing. Okay, that helps put more into inflation, which is what they're trying to combat now as a whole, is to get rid of the inflation, bring it down, and try to get things back to normal. So, all right, we've got this article here that says, what happens when the Fed raises interest rates? All right, so let's look into this. When people talk about the Fed raising interest rates, they're referring to the federal funds rate, also called the federal funds target rate. At its regular meetings, the Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC, sets a target range for the federal funds rate, which acts as a reference for the interest rates big commercial banks charge each other for the overnight loans, so that they can pay their debts by taking those loans to resolve stuff overnight before the next day of business. So banks borrow overnight loans to satisfy liquidity requirements set by regulators, including the Fed. The average of the rates banks negotiate for overnight loans is called the effective federal funds rate. This in turn impacts other market rates like the prime rate and the SOFR or SOFR. So it says banks borrow overnight loans to satisfy liquidity requirements. Right, so what are they saying? They have to actually have money on hand. That is a requirement that the banks have to have on hand, set by the regulators. Okay, all right, so maybe I misunderstood that. Do I understand it now based on what this is saying? They're taking, well, duh. So look, for the past few years, even before this pandemic, banks were being bailed out. We've talked about this before. Banks were being bailed out by the Fed. The Fed would print money, and then they would buy those bonds or contracts from the banks. And then therefore, because the bank's not going to freaking give you money without holding anything, so you can act like the bank just, let me print money and give it away. That is not what the Fed does. So they renegotiate contracts, right? Renegotiate bonds. Okay, so the bond is now going to say, if you don't pay me within X amount, then I'm going to now have this contract and it's all going to be owed to me. So the overnights that they're talking about is how the banks were being made liquid. So how to make them liquid? By redo your contract, make a contract for the contracts that you're holding. So let's just make up a story right now. Let's just say Bank ZZ Bop. Bank ZZ Bop has $485,000 worth of contracts, loans or bonds that their bank is responsible for, that they're getting payments for from the people that use that bank, that took loans out from that bank. So the bank has no liquidity, and it's the regulation that says that they've got to have liquidity on hand. So what do? All right, look, and it's not like they have physical paper money there. I think it's just numbers, but that they can actually have. So anyways, but then the Fed prints real money, so it's like, yeah, I'll give you the numbers right now, and then we'll send the money in the bank, truck will show up, and you have the money on hand, right? Okay. So now to make them liquid, they say, all right, we'll buy that $400,000 worth of contracts, so put them all in one contract, and if you can fulfill this loan that we're about to give you, this new bond that we're about to give you, then you'll get your bonds back, these loans back, and they'll be yours again. But if you can't, they're going to be ours, because we're not going to frickin' just give you money so that you can keep going out there and just giving people loans knowing they can't pay for it. Oh, did I say that? I mean, just giving people loans and waiting for them to pay it back, right? So that's my understanding of it. Looking at this here, it seems to be saying the same thing, making them liquid by pretty much buying up those bonds and contracts. So what happens when the Fed raises rates? When the Fed raises the federal funds target rate, the goal is to increase the cost of credit throughout the economy. Higher interest rates make loans more expensive for both businesses and consumers, and everyone ends up spending more on interest payments. Now, with that being said, when we look at how people are buying up houses now and buying their cars now, they're doing that under the pretense that if the Fed increases these interest rates, then their interest rates through the banks that are giving them these loans is going to increase. So they might, instead of having a 13.59 interest rate on their mortgage, they might end up with a 17. Right, so that just means that less money going to the principal, more money going to the interest, and it just causes you to be paying for a longer amount of time. So most people are trying to catch these loans before that happens and get locked in rates for at least 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 10 years, yada 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 yada. So that's my understanding of that, and so just sharing it. So it says, those who can't or don't want to afford the higher payments postpone projects that involve financing. It simultaneously encourages people to save money to earn higher interest payments. This reduces the supply of money in circulation, which tends to lower inflation and moderate economic activity. Right, so if the bank keeps allowing people to get these debt contracts or slave contracts, right? Because you go to the bank, you say, I want a new car. You go to the bank, and the bank's just always done it for some people. The banks have always just done that. You know what I'm saying? Some based it on credit scores, some based it on zip codes. There's a whole lot of talk about that stuff. I'm not going to get into that. I don't really care. But the point is, for the longest time, banks have been doing these things. And then even when the Obama administration was in effect, they had talked about a lot predatory loans, and then some laws were made to help stop those things. So those loans were just being handed out, and then we would have people not fulfilling the maturity of those loans, right? They wouldn't paying them off. So a lot of this stuff ended up not getting paid. Then banks would sell these loans to other banks, or these would be debts sold to other countries. They'd be bundled up, take a bunch of mortgages, take a bunch of car notes, bundle them all up, and send them to this company over in this country. Let's just use China. Send a bunch of these loans in a contract, a bundled contract to China. China buys up, and now they're holding U.S. dollar debt. So this goes back to the point she was making for other nations that are, either have loans or have U.S. debt bonds. This is what you're looking at. If you're holding U.S. debt bonds, you might be in a position now where you'll start getting payments because the interest rates are going up, so people are going to not be buying new stuff, which means they'll focus and hone in on paying for what they already have, possibly, unless other things continue to happen, which we see a shortage of food. We're seeing a shortage of drivers to move merchandise from here and there, and so on and so forth. So other things in the quote unquote pandemic. So a bunch of things exist that could cause problems that could possibly keep United States citizens, companies, businesses, so on and so forth from making their payments on their bonds, right? So with that, it's pretty interesting to see that either way you look at it, if you owe the United States, they're going to increase the interest rate. So that means you could probably see your actual bond or contract go from an interest rate of 6.75 to maybe 7.35. Now that is going to, whatever the value is going to be the value of your contract. So you're going to see that increase as then your maturity. Let's say the maturity on it, let's say let's say a $50,000 loan and it's a 6.75% interest, and then they bump it up 1%. So then that 1% is going to add to the interest throughout the duration, which means that at the end of that bond, the maturity of that bond, they should have made a lot of money in the interest of it. Okay, so you can remember, and I'm gonna close out with this. You can remember for the longest time they were like 0% interest rates and then negative interest rates because they wanted people to take on debt so that jobs and businesses could move on, right? So you think about it. You want to buy a house. Companies want to build houses, but nobody's buying a house. So what do? Drop the interest rate, make it easier for people to get into these loans and contracts. It's almost predatory. So they make it easy for you to get into these contracts, get into these loans, get these bonds, and then the builders can continue to work. They continue to work, continue to build houses. They continue to supply jobs. You supply jobs, people make money, and then they take that money, they pay bills, and then they go to stores and they shop. So then other businesses begin to make money. So this is why they did 0% interest rates and negative interest rates. Now that the fun times are over, they need to collect interest. So now we're going to see that increase. And now it's going to be risky because some people might be able to afford their new mortgages as they increase. Some people might not. Some people might not be able to afford to go out and buy cars anymore. That might come to a head too. So we got to watch all these things pan out. I just wanted to share that clip because it was very interesting and share my thoughts on it. And yeah, feel free to share your thoughts. Post comments in the comments below. If you think that I was incorrect about some of the stuff I said and maybe I was off, share it. And if you agreed, share it as well. Thank you.